Young man shames his mother on a crowded bus until a military veteran intervenes and transforms the moment. On a humid afternoon in July 2025, a city bus rolled through the streets of Burlington, Vermont. Every seat was filled, and the aisle brimmed with passengers gripping metal poles for balance. The air carried a mix of damp pavement and faint perfume, common for a busy summer day. Soft chatter and the hum of the engine created a familiar city soundtrack. In the middle rows, a young man named Lucas Hayes slouched in his seat, his face tight with irritation. He was in his mid-20s, with a lean build and restless hands that tapped his knee. His voice cut through the bus's hum, sharp and impatient. "Mom, how could you forget the tickets?" he snapped, throwing his hands up. Beside him sat his mother, Margaret, a woman with soft gray hair tied in a loose bun. Her warm brown eyes held a quiet kindness, though they flickered with unease now. She clutched a faded cloth bag, her fingers twisting the straps nervously. "I'm so sorry, Lucas," she said, her voice low and trembling slightly. "I was sure I packed them this morning before we left." Lucas groaned loudly, his head tilting back dramatically. "You always do this, Mom," he said, his words echoing in the cramped space. "It's like you can't keep track of anything." Dad was right to get fed up. Nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting toward the pair. A woman knitting across the aisle paused, her needle still, her lips pursed. A man in the back adjusted his cap, muttering something to himself. No one spoke up, though the tension hung heavy in the air. At the rear of the bus, a man in a neatly pressed military uniform sat tall and still. His name tag read, Wilson, and he carried an air of quiet authority. Broad-shouldered and weathered, his chest gleamed with rows of service medals. His deep-set eyes, framed by faint lines, scanned the scene with calm focus. Margaret's hands shook as she smoothed her skirt, trying to steady herself. Her cheeks flushed pink, and she avoided looking at the faces around her. "Lucas, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let's talk about this when we get home, okay?" "Home?" Lucas scoffed, loud enough for the whole bus to hear. "You'll probably forget where we live next, Mom." The bus felt smaller now, the air thick with unease. A teenage girl nearby slipped her phone from her pocket, sneaking a glance at Lucas. Her friend leaned over, whispering, "This is getting rough." Passengers exchanged uneasy looks, but no one stepped in yet. Wilson's fingers rested lightly on his knees, but his jaw clenched subtly. He watched Margaret closely, noting the way her shoulders slumped. Her face told a story of years spent smoothing over conflicts, always putting others first. Lucas's voice grew sharper, his words slicing deeper with each sentence. "You're so embarrassing sometimes," he said, leaning toward her. "I can't believe I had to deal with this in front of everyone." Margaret flinched, her hands tightening around her bag like a lifeline. Her lips pressed into a thin line, holding back the hurt swelling inside. She wasn't new to Lucas's outbursts. His frustration had grown since his father left years ago. But having it spill out here, in public, stung in a way she hadn't expected. A man in a denim jacket near the front frowned, his fingers pausing on his coffee cup. The woman beside him whispered, "Someone ought to say something." But the bus stayed quiet, save for Lucas's biting words. Wilson's gaze lingered on Margaret, his heart stirring with recognition. He saw in her the same quiet strength his own mother had carried long ago. She'd been a seamstress, working late nights to keep their family afloat after his father passed. Wilson remembered her calloused hands, always busy, always giving. He'd been too young then to appreciate her sacrifices, too caught up in his own dreams. Lucas's voice cracked as his anger flared hotter. "This is why Dad walked out," he said, his tone cold and cutting. "You mess everything up, and I'm stuck cleaning up after you." Margaret's breath hitched, and a tear slipped down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly, her hand trembling, but the pain was clear. Every head on the bus turned now, the chatter fading completely. The teenage girl angled her phone, recording subtly, her thumb hovering over the screen. Her friend nudged her, muttering, "This is too much." Wilson's hands shifted, gripping the edge of his seat. His face remained steady, but a fire kindled in his chest. He'd seen too much in his 30 years of service, war, loss, regret, to let this pass. Margaret reminded him of his mother's resilience, her endless patience. He thought of the letters his mother used to send him during his deployments. She'd write about small things, her garden, the neighbor's dog, church suppers. He'd skim them quickly, promising himself he'd reply later. But later slipped away, and when she died suddenly, those letters became his greatest treasure and his deepest regret. Lucas leaned closer to Margaret, his voice dripping with scorn. "Can't you do anything right?" he said, almost spitting the words. Margaret's shoulders caved inward, as if trying to disappear. Her fingers clutched her bag so tightly her knuckles whitened. She thought of the years she'd spent raising Lucas alone after her husband left. The late nights helping with homework. The birthdays she made special with little money. She'd poured her heart into him, but his anger had built a wall she couldn't breach. The bus swayed as it hit a pothole, but the silence was deafening. Wilson's eyes locked on Lucas, studying him with a mix of pity and resolve. He saw a young man lashing out, maybe from pain he didn't know how to name. Wilson had been that young once, quick to judge, slow to listen. He remembered snapping at his mother once, frustrated by her worry over his enlistment. Her quiet forgiveness had stayed with him, a lesson he carried through life. Just as Lucas opened his mouth again, a voice broke the tension. "That's enough, young man," said an older woman 3 rows ahead. She turned in her seat, her glasses glinting under the bus lights. Her voice was firm but kind, like a teacher addressing a wayward student. Lucas froze, his face twisting into a scowl. "This isn't your business," he shot back, though his voice wavered. Before he could continue, Wilson stood up slowly. His tall frame seemed to fill the aisle, commanding every eye on the bus. The medals on his chest caught the light, a silent testament to his service. He moved forward with deliberate steps, his boots soft against the floor. The bus fell so quiet you could hear the faint squeak of the brakes. Lucas shrank back in his seat, his bravado crumbling under Wilson's gaze. Wilson stopped a few feet away, his presence like a steady anchor. He looked at Lucas, then turned his eyes to Margaret. Her face was streaked with tears, but she held her head high, clinging to dignity. Wilson's voice, when he spoke, was deep and measured, carrying across the bus. "I wasn't going to say anything," he said, his tone calm but unyielding. "But watching a son treat his mother this way, I can't stay silent." Lucas tried to muster a retort, his voice shaky. "What, you're gonna lecture me now?" he asked, but it lacked conviction. Wilson ignored the jab and crouched slightly to meet Margaret's eyes. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice warm with respect. "You've carried a lot for your family, haven't you?" Margaret blinked, surprised, her lips parting but no words coming. Wilson's words touched a chord. She had carried so much, often alone. She thought of the years juggling bills, soothing Lucas's teenage anger, keeping their small home warm. Her husband's departure had left a hole, but she'd filled it with love for her son. Wilson stood tall again, turning to Lucas. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Thought I had all the answers. Thought my mom didn't understand me." Lucas blinked, caught off guard, unsure where this was going. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Wilson's expression softened, but his voice held steady. "I served 30 years in the military," he said, gesturing faintly to his uniform. Faced wars, lost friends, carried memories I'll never shake. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. But none of that compares to the day I lost my mother. The bus was still, every passenger leaning in, caught in his story. Margaret's hands loosened on her bag, her eyes fixed on Wilson. She saw the pain in his face, a mirror to her own quiet struggles. Wilson's voice grew softer, forcing everyone to listen closely. "My mom raised me alone after my dad died," he said. "She worked 2 jobs, never complained, always had time to listen. I was too stubborn to see it then," he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "She'd call when I was overseas, just to hear my voice. I'd cut her off. 'Mom, I'm busy, I'll call back,' I'd say." He shook his head, a shadow crossing his face. "But I didn't call back. Not enough. One day, I got word she'd had a heart attack," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was gone before I could get home." Lucas shifted uncomfortably, his hands clenching his jeans. Margaret's tears fell silently, her heart aching for Wilson's loss. She remembered Lucas's childhood, how he'd cling to her after nightmares. Even now, beneath his anger, she saw that same boy, hurting and lost. Wilson stepped closer to Lucas, his voice firm but not harsh. "Do you know what it's like to stand by a grave, wishing you'd said, 'I love you,' one more time? To beg for a chance to say, 'I'm sorry, but know it's too late?'" His eyes bore into Lucas, not with anger, but with urgency. "Don't be the man who learns that lesson the hard way," he said. "That regret, it's heavier than anything I carried in war." The bus felt frozen, every passenger holding their breath. Margaret's hands trembled, but she lifted her chin, meeting Wilson's gaze. His words gave her strength, a reminder that her love for Lucas mattered. Lucas's face flushed red, his mouth opening, then closing. His hands gripped his seat, his head dipping low. The teenage girl lowered her phone, her thumb no longer recording. Her friend whispered, "This is deep." Wilson stood steady, his presence a quiet force. He looked at Margaret again, seeing her resilience shine through her pain. She'd spent years absorbing Lucas's frustration, never letting it dim her hope. Wilson thought of his mother's smile, how it warmed him even in his darkest moments. He'd give anything for one more day to thank her, to hold her hand. Lucas's voice broke the silence, small and fragile. I didn't mean to hurt her," he said, his voice cracking. Margaret's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. Wilson didn't move, his gaze unwavering. "Then tell her," he said, his tone calm but direct. "Say what's in your heart, don't wait." Lucas's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with a flicker of defiance. But then his shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him. He turned to Margaret, his hands shaking as he reached for hers. She flinched slightly but didn't pull away, her eyes searching his face. "I'm sorry, Mom," Lucas whispered, tears welling up. "I've been so angry about Dad, about everything, and I took it out on you." "You didn't deserve any of it," he added, his voice breaking. Margaret's tears spilled over, but a soft smile curved her lips. "Lucas," she said, her voice warm and trembling. "You're my son, I've always loved you. No matter what. Hearing you say this means more than you know," she said, squeezing his hand. The bus seemed to exhale, the tension lifting like a cloud. Passengers wiped their eyes, some smiling faintly, moved by the moment. The knitting woman resumed her needles, her expression softer now. The teenage girl slipped her phone into her pocket, no longer filming. Lucas turned to Wilson, his voice steadier but raw. "Thank you," he said, his eyes meeting Wilson's. "Your story, it hit me hard. I don't want to lose her." Wilson nodded, a faint warmth in his gaze. "It's not easy to own your mistakes," he said. But you've started, keep going. For her. Lucas looked down, a mix of shame and resolve on his face. I want to do better, he said quietly. I want to make things right. Margaret's hand tightened on his, her touch steady and loving. We'll figure it out together, she said, her voice full of hope. She thought of the years ahead, the chance to rebuild what had frayed. Wilson stepped back, his role in the moment complete. He glanced around, catching nods of respect from a few passengers. Margaret looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. She saw in Wilson a man who'd carried his own pain but used it to help others. Her heart swelled, she'd spent so long feeling unseen, and his words had lifted her. As the bus slowed to a stop, a new voice broke through. Young man, called an older man from the back, near the emergency exit. He leaned forward, his face weathered, his eyes sharp with experience. Don't stop now, you've taken a big step. Every head turned, curious about this new voice. He adjusted his worn coat and spoke again, his tone firm but kind. I lost my son years ago, he said, his voice steady but heavy. We hadn't talked in over a decade, my fault. Mostly. I'd trade anything for 1 minute to tell him I was proud of him. Don't let time slip away from you, he said, looking at Lucas. Lucas's eyes brimmed with tears, and he nodded slowly. He looked at Margaret, her hand warm in his, her gaze free of judgment. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope, a chance to heal. He stood, gently helping Margaret to her feet. Let's get off here, Mom, he said, his voice soft but certain. I want to talk, really talk. Just us. The passengers parted, offering small smiles and quiet nods. As Lucas and Margaret stepped off the bus, a murmur of warmth spread. Wilson watched them go, a subtle smile tugging at his lips. He thought of his mother, her laughter, her unwavering love. Speaking up had been his way of honoring her memory. He returned to his seat, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The teenage girl hesitated, then deleted the video from her phone. Some things don't belong online, she said to her friend. Her friend nodded, her own eyes misty. The bus rolled on, and conversation slowly picked up again. But the air felt different, gentler, more thoughtful. People weren't just scrolling phones or staring out windows. They were reflecting on family, on words they'd left unsaid. As Wilson's stop approached, a man beside him spoke up. What you did back there, it was powerful, he said quietly. Made me think about my sister. I haven't called her in months. I'm gonna fix that tonight, he added. Wilson smiled faintly as he stood to leave. Do it, he said simply. One call can change everything. He stepped off into the fading daylight, his boots steady on the pavement. The passengers watched him go, his quiet strength etched in their minds. Margaret and Lucas, now walking home, carried his words with them. She felt seen, valued, her sacrifices acknowledged in a way she hadn't expected. Wilson's story had reminded her that love endures, even through pain. Time with loved ones is fleeting, and words hold power. Kindness, respect, and gratitude are lessons worth learning early. If this moment touches you, reach out to someone today. Say what's in your heart, you won't regret it. The bus continued its route, but it carried a new kind of quiet. A quiet filled with hope, reflection, and a little more love.